Welcome to another movie plot and enjoy the memories. We open on a deep-sea expedition of the yellow submarine called the Siren 1. On this occasion it happens to implode, so two suits are sent to collect the sub's designer Wick, as we need somebody to blame. They bring him to his old employer Steensland, who says that it's all Wick's fault for the sub's nuclear reactor malfunctioning. Since Wick didn't even design the Siren with a reactor, that means that these fools have tried to squeeze one and then blame him when it failed. He turns to leave, but Steensland says that Wick's friend was on board, so he reluctantly agrees to help, as I guess he thinks the guy could survive this. However, the moment that Wick leaves, the dingus in charge snickers, so you know there's some debauchery going on. The Siren 2 is a duplicate of the one that blew up, so it's strange that they plan to take this out when everybody blames the bad design for the loss of the first crew. Generic crew member Rivera behaves rudely toward Wick for this reason, despite telling Skeets 2 minutes ago that she finds him attractive. Other crew members like Fleming also play the blame game, while Dr. Carlo is the only seaman who behaves like an adult. Wick's new bunkmate Robbins suffers a bad case of seasickness despite the Siren 2 being completely stationary. Computer specialists were hard to come by in the 80s, so Wick must sleep under the vomiting nerd, making him the bravest person on board. Second would be Captain Phillips, but he calls out Skeet for not wearing military fatigues when nobody is, so I believe he's a little racist. The only person dressed formally is Lieutenant Nina, who has an undisclosed past with Wick and says that she never wanted to see him again. Maybe she shouldn't have came then, as all she does is argue with her ex-lover until Robbins arrives to save us all. The moment the crew departs for the crash site, someone's shown doing shifty things on the computer, as we got a saboteur on our hands. Captain Phillips orders them to dive under some icebergs, but Wick says that he needs to run some tests first in case their instruments are off. This is the expert that they brought along to make sure they don't crash, but Phillips like, nah, we're good, I know better. He takes them under and between two icebergs, but the scope's off by a few degrees, so wouldn't you know it, they crash. Phillips like, how could this happen? I took every precaution, but despite Captain Crunch over here, they make it through without all dying. Once again the blame is put on the designer, but Wick's like, no, look at it, my design is perfect. For speaking to him like this, the captain demotes Wick and tells him to stay off the bridge, but he doesn't work here anyway.
Captain.
As they approach a rift on the ocean floor, they pick up a signal from the Siren 1's black box, so descend to retrieve it. Somebody needs to get wet, so we introduce Sven to save our already established named characters the trouble. Nina wants to run some tests on the seaweed in the area, so Sven goes outside to collect some and brings it back. As she's doing the science thing, a fish leaps out of a tank with a piece of the toxic seaweed embedded in its gill. She does some further sciencing to learn that the plant is releasing deadly toxins, and I guess this poor little guy just couldn't take it. We're like 30,000 feet under the ocean here, and Super Sven's just swimming around in a regular old wetsuit. He comes across a piece of the Siren 1's hull and begins to take photos when suddenly being attacked and turning into a red mist. Philippe's like, why did you hold me back? I could have saved him, as everyone in this sub is just as delusional as the next. What's not a delusion is the giant amoeba that wraps itself around the submarine and begins dragging it into the rift. It's even looking through the window, the cheeky bugger, so Robbins activates the electrical anti-sea monster defenses. Something about overloading the cooling system, so the giant snot bubble retreats and we never see it again. The crew isn't out of this yet, as they begin to sink below their recommended depth, so the retired designer takes over from the qualified pilot. Apparently Wick is just that good that he veers the sub onto a ledge, which nobody else with two arms could have done. It saves them from imploding at a depth that only a Sven in a wetsuit could survive, and the crew begin making repairs. Skeet gives Wick assurance that he's his kind of white boy, while the captain reprimands their savior for disobeying his orders. Since his refusal to stay out of the control room saved their life this time, he lets it slide, but honestly Phillips has some screws loose. He hears out Skeet, who says they should return to the surface, but tells Rivera to shut it when she says they should retrieve the black box first. Not sure why, because the captain then brings them down a subterranean cavern in search of the box, just like she said. He probably just likes Skeet because he quotes Full Metal Jacket to describe their journey as a golf ball being sucked through a garden hose. They avoid some steam vents and surface in an air pocket, wondering how in the hell the box got all the way down here. They chalk it up as an underwater current, but Robbins determines that it isn't the black box and is instead an SOS, which I guess sounds the same. However, as the crew mount an expedition into the cavern, he does a shifty smile at camera, so I wouldn't trust him. Adorned in hazmat suits to protect them from the toxic fumes, the crew row across to the bank and begin searching for the signal. Fleming just has to go sticking his nose where it doesn't belong, getting it bitten off by a gigantic cave insect. The rest of the crew collect him and retreat back to the sub, while dozens more cave fissures emerge and they must fight them off. Fleming begins to rapidly mutate and begs to be killed, but you don't have to tell Rivera twice, as she blows off his entire face. I feel quite bad for Philippe, who returns to rescue Rivera when she gets her leg stuck, only to have his own bitten off by a giant land piranha. He bleeds out while the rest stumble across a laboratory and the source of the SOS, though the person who sent it's long dead. They swipe a bunch of lore tablets and scramble back to the sub where we introduce Mr. Muller to save the other named characters again. He comes across Nina's mutant seaweed consuming her lab and gets slimed by the toxic water fauna. A chef named Francisco alerts the crew about the situation, but he also feels sick as their water supply is contaminated. That earns him a one-way ticket to isolation in a room beside Muller, who's now long dead and looking like a plant. Just before the rest of the crew board the sub, Carlo falls in the water and gets eaten alive. But why did we bring the doctor anyway? When they get back on board, Wick and Skeet are like, damn, we forgot about Rivera, but nobody returns for her because screw that. They learn from the vlogs taken from the lab that the government was creating biological weapons down here like they usually do. Some of the genetically altered seaweed got angry, some of the giant sea creatures got loose, and now everybody including Wick's friends dead. Captain Phillips says we gotta destroy the lab before it reaches the surface, but I'm not sure if that's even a threat. We suit up anyway and return to the cave in hopes of saving the world from a seaweed invasion. They hear Rivera battling it out with the wildlife until she comes across a machine called the Accelerator, which is the source of the mutants. Tentacles reach out and drag her inside, where she gets used as the host to produce amniotic sacs containing hybrid fetuses. The rest of the crew locate the chamber and like good scientists they poke a sac, causing the half-human sea creature to deploy. As they try to figure out a way to save Rivera, the giant monster on the ceiling that they somehow didn't notice reaches out and grabs Skeet. He's immediately eaten while Rivera's on her own as the remaining crew blow up a conveniently placed pile of fuel tanks and make their escape. Robbins receives a message on board the sub that the Accelerator blew up and declares his mission accomplished. He's been hired by the company who built the secret lab to cover up the experiment and save themselves from any scandal. Planning to abandon Wick, Phillips and Nina to die down here, Robbins closes the outer hatch and sees them returning. The Siren 2 is designed so that it can't descend while the hatch is still open, but being able to open it from the outside seems like a bit of a flaw. The crew make it inside before Robbins escapes, so he holds them all at gunpoint and reveals that there was never a black box. Not sure that reveal even matters, but the company wants to kill Wick because he knows they were responsible for illegally modifying the first sub. Instead of just shooting them, Robbins traps them in the room with Seaweed Muller and brings the Siren out of the cave towards the rift. Fortunately, Wick designed this thing because he just climbs into a hatch and detaches a computer chip that controls the sub. No wonder they thought he was responsible for the first sub going down with all these weird failsafes that he threatens to burn unless released.
Wait a minute.
With an obvious dummy disguised as Phillips, the bigger dummy falls for it and the group manage to wrestle the gun away from his hand. They force him into the room where Francisco was left to die and the captain rolls Robbins' face into his infected corpse. Our trio seal him inside to die like the chef while Wick gets the ship running again so they can escape. Phillips rigs the sub to self-destruct as they always have that setting, and they head for the mini-escape sub that wasn't mentioned until now. Unfortunately, the captain seals the door behind Wick and Nina and reveals that he got infected while playing Kiss the Corpse. He stays on board and goes down with his ship while the couple jump in the mini-sub and deploy from the Siren 2. The captain directs the mother sub into the rift so that when it detonates, all of the mutant sea life is trapped inside. We don't get to see the survivors reach the surface and just trust that Wick isn't killed before exposing all of the evidence. And the movie ends.